Good morning. Welcome back to Morning Live. Now, this past weekend saw the Rugby World Cup champion South Africa narrowly losing to the team which many regard as the best in the world, even though they are ranked number 2, which is, of course, France, in an encounter that took place in Marseille. While England, they cemented their place at the top of the white ball cricket by clinching the T20 World Cup to become the only team in the history of cricket to hold both the 50 over and T20 World Champions crowns at the same time. To talk to us about this, we have in studio joining us Lunga Kupiso, and joining us on Zoom we are joined by Khanyiso Tshwaku. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Morning, Vasile. Morning, Kemo.
Morning.
Khanyiso, I want to start with you. Let's talk about the clash between the Springboks as well as France. It was one of the most physical encounters we've seen in a while by two teams which many regard as the two top teams in the world. Let's talk about how South Africa came so close to getting a victory against France in Marseille, which has been a venue that hasn't been so kind to them in the past.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it was South Africa's first test against France in Marseille since 2002, and that was a test match that was infamous for two things: a record defeat against France, firstly, and then also Jean Tibete's 7-minute debut. But South Africa came there as a very different side as compared to the 2002 side. There was that slice of misfortune where Peter Steph du Toit was sent off in the 11th minute for that clean out on Jonathan Danty. And then the Springboks went 13-0 down, but they fought back. I mean, at some point they were leading 26-22. Then there was the Dion Foudy yellow card, there was Antoine Dupont, the red card. So the game evened out. Then there was the issue with the officiating with Wayne Barnes, where at some point, especially when CP Falatea scored that 74th minute try. And then the issue was not about the legality of the try, whether it was double movement. And then also there was a controversy of Wayne Barnes not being able to communicate with the TMO because the try itself was actually not shown on the big screen at the stadium. And then when I checked the highlights again, and also just saw on social media streams, that the try was not being shown back on TV there in South Africa. So there was a bit of controversy, but it was a very tightly contested test match. But the fact of the matter is South Africa have lost to Ireland, they have lost to France 2 consecutive matches. They've now lost 5 out of 11 test matches in this year alone, which does become a slight problem for the Springboks, in that you want to build some momentum leading into a World Cup here. And one of the things that SA Rugby Director of Rugby, Rassie Erasmus, and coach, Springbok coach Jacques Linabu, what they've said is that what happens in a before World Cup, it does not have a lot of influence in what happens in the World Cup. And one would hope that despite the Boks playing well, playing some brave rugby, they're not getting the kind of results that South African fans would want. And as much as there is development with the taking equipment in the Springboks, because there are a lot of young players coming through, you want to mix that development also with positive results.
Indeed, and I mean, South Africans love to see a performance, which we didn't get much of in the T20 Cricket World Cup. Lunga, let me bring you into the conversation. Let's talk about England and how they are now the T20 champions, and how almost less than 10 years ago, they were in no man's land when it came to white ball cricket. So what is it that they have been able to do right to turn the tide?
Well, they've been able to do what South Africa hasn't been able to do, and that is when there are issues at HQ, you take care of the issues. You don't dilly-dally or dance around without addressing the elephants in the room. Also, what they've done very well is appointing different directors or different individuals to lead different components of the game. But perhaps what I'll credit this World Cup victory for them is the appointment of Brendan McCullum into that test side. Just continuing with the same version of cricket or brand of cricket that you see in T20 World Cup, that you would see also bleeding into their test cricketing style as well. And perhaps what that has done, it has created a confidence within the team that even the guy who's looking at recruiting players for the test side, he's also looking for players who are playing freely, for players who are playing with confidence, who believe that they can play the game. And so, you know, that has translated right across. And of course, you know, it's beautiful to see that it is possible for one nation to win a 50 over World Cup and then translate over into a T20 World Cup. And perhaps, you know, we can sit as South Africa and say, okay, we're taking lessons from the Brits.
And as we sit and try to take these lessons from the Brits, let's talk about the upcoming World Cup. What is it that we need to change from a Proteas perspective? Because if there are any changes, we need to make them sooner rather than later.
Well, you know, the advent consequence of COVID-19 is that now we're going to have World Cup after World Cup after World Cup. The beautiful thing about that is that there isn't too much time in between the World Cups. And so we can't say since the last one we've lost a couple of key players. Perhaps from a Proteas perspective, what needs to happen is just some consistency in terms of the personnel that you have, and you work on building the side's confidence. You work on, you know, a few technicalities that you have identified as a side from your game. But perhaps for the South Africans, it's a bit easier. You just need to bat. And if the guys who you have now as part of your setup cannot bat, go and recruit others who can bat. You know, maybe we should also lose this fear of dropping players when they're not performing. Of course, that's a bit of a contentious topic as well, because once we say that, certain individuals are armored to start targeting the captain as well, but that's a conversation we also need to have. Non-performing players need to be replaced with those who are performing on the domestic front. But also we must understand, just because you're performing at domestic front doesn't mean that you're going to perform at an international stage. Look at Aiden Markram and how long it took him to get to a point where South Africans are like, ish, yeah, we can't envisage a South African side without Aiden Markram. So, you know, there's lots of considerations, but I think for now consistency is key. Just work on producing the results.
Now, Khanyiso, we've spoken here, Lunga and I, about the players. Let's move more into the coaching. Now with Boucher out of the picture, we've heard the Director of Cricket, Inokwe, talking about how he's hoping to have different coaches leading the different formats of the game. Now we look at Maketa. Should this edition of his go beyond this Australian tour, or do you think we should also start looking at possibly bringing a Jeffrey Toyana back into the setup at the Proteas? What are your thoughts on that setup?
You need to first judge it on results, because you can't look past the fact that Bonga Maketa has been a person who has been in CSA system for quite a while, was an assistant when Otis Gibson was coach, and now they dropped back and coached SAA, so he has quite a report and an understanding of the system at hand. So what becomes important now is that you need to be judged on the results. Is well, the only question would be, is it just the series against Australia? Because you've also got the significant matter of the World Cup qualifiers. There's the matches against England, there's the matches against the Netherlands. So there's 5 ODIs that South Africa need to want to qualify. And remember that in those particular matches, they also need to deal with the significant matter of hoping that Sri Lanka loses. So, for example, if a Malbonga Maketa goes with the Proteas to Australia and they do very well when they square the series or they actually win, remember that will give them this thing test championship points, and they'll put them back at the top of the lot, number 1. And then if he then wins those 5 matches against England and the Netherlands, those are 50 ODI league points, and most probably South Africa won all of those matches. That is probably World Cup qualification. So, but then you're going to have to, as Lunga correctly alludes to, find a formula that works from a cricket perspective. Because the example that he uses, when Trevor Bayliss took over, England poured a lot of resources into the 50-over cricket in particular. And they set out the stall very early after the 2015 World Cup, where they said, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to play our cricket. And then it worked. So there needs to be a very clear identification of how they want to play the different formats. And remember that South Africa will be hosting the 2027 Cricket World Cup. So if they want to turn over a new leaf, was probably why should they qualify for the World Cup? They need to start from that point onwards and use the World Cup and the following 4 years to find a cricket system that will work for them from a 50-over and a 20-over perspective, and drive that narrative right through to the 2027 World Cup.
Gentlemen, we have unfortunately run out of time, but Khanyiso, Lunga and I are both jealous that you get to travel around the world with the Springboks. We hope you enjoy the next encounter on the tour where South Africa goes up against Italy. And thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, guys.
Lunga, thank you so much for joining us once again. I did also want to throw that question to you just to find out your thoughts. So just quickly, if you can tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'll keep it very short. It amazes me how Cricket South Africa will always put certain individuals on audition runs, and others come around and they get given 4 years. So who qualifies to be auditioned? Who doesn't qualify to get a pass? So for me, that's that's the grey area.
CSA, we have a lot of grey areas.
Sort that out, and the 2027 Cricket World Cup is not the one that we're focusing on, but the next one is the one that we should be focusing on, because I also get a sense that there will be that rationale or that excuse to say, no, the next one is not so important. We're targeting the one we're playing at home. Go for the next one.
Thank you so much for your time here, Lunga, this morning. Lunga Kupiso as well as Khanyiso Tshwaku joining us as we talk about all things cricket as well as the Springboks end of your tour.